So today I'm going to talk about a very small project I started a few weeks ago. It's about CSS, and it's currently mainly based on Tailwind CSS, which is a CSS library. What I did is I took something that works very well, a library which I like, and I tried to rewrite it in the Clojure fashion. And in the process, I tried to take a different approach. And in fact, I ended up doing the total opposite of what Tailwind is doing. So I'm going to start. So the idea was indeed to take Tailwind and to improve it. The destination of the user of Girouette is supposed to be people who use Clojure, because it's made in Clojure, but it's more convenient to use it from Clojure. Why I did it? Well, because I can, and not really because I can do better using Clojure. Well, that's what I think, and I wanted to try. So I have a proof of concept now. It's a work in progress. So why I did that in Clojure? Because there is something in Clojure which I really love, is that we can treat the code as data if we want, thanks to the macro system. And we also have access to a lot of data when we do front-end development, as the hiccup format is in fact just data. And the nice things about data is that you can read it. And when you read your code and when you read what you are writing, you can do meta stuff, which you will see. And why I did something in Clojure, because I thought that ClojureScript rely maybe a little too heavily on JavaScript. And then we have to follow the trend of JavaScript. We have to update when JavaScript libraries update. Maybe it's better to have something made in Clojure that evolve in the same way than other Clojure library evolve, and which are presented as pure functions and with no side effect. And more importantly, I think the part which I love in Clojure is that I can trust that no value is going to change in my back. So I am confident when I build a project and build a pipeline. I'm confident that I can combine things together without having surprises most of the time. So here is what I did. First, what Tailwind and Tachyons are doing. Here I mentioned about Tachyon, but I did not use it yet. I just write it because Tailwind and Tachyon works similarly. So what Tailwind is doing is that it generates a lot of predefined classes, CSS class names, with the hope that those class names are covering all the use cases of the users. The problem is that there is always a limit on how much class names you can generate. And in the end, you always run into some limitations. The users, they are all eccentric in their own way, and they will need to do some things that the original library author did not see coming. So what people are expected to do when this happens is that they go to some config files and add more properties, so that Tailwind can generate more class names. And in the end, when you go toward production and you don't want to have so many class names in your CSS files which are unused, you use a special tool which is going to introspect your program and hopefully find all the potential class names that you use and remove everything which you do not use. It's called purge CSS. So this is a normal workflow when you use Tailwind. from JavaScript or ClojureScript. And one important thing is that it's made in JavaScript. For Girouette, the first thing I did is use a better base. So, of course, it's made in Clojure. And based on that, we can take the approach in the reverse. Instead of generating a lot of class names and hopefully covering all the use cases, we first look at the source code of the user and see what class names are used. And based on that, and based on a grammar, and I mean grammar the same as the one which are used in programming languages. Based on that, we are going to generate the CSS classes for those CSS class names. And while doing that, the complexity, the size of your CSS class, CSS content is going to be proportional to how many class names you use in your own project. So if you have a small project with very reduced numbers of different class names, then your CSS file is going to be small from the start. When I ported Tailwind to Girouette, I realized that there have been some compromises in the way it was designed. And I guess the underlying reason why they did things the way they did was to avoid some combinatory issues. For example, when you want to represent a color in CSS as a class name, you cannot represent all the 6 million colors that you can potentially use. That would be too many class names. Your browser is going to die before even displaying anything. So they had to make some choices of what colors they want to provide the user. But in the other approach, you don't have this problem. You don't have memory problem. And you also don't need to tweak some config files because the way you use your class names is not limited. You can write, well, I will describe more in a few slides. And because you generate things instead of removing things, you do not need to use a tool like pure CSS. So the advantage of going grammar-based is that you can use all the numbers you want inside the class names. So for those who do not know CSS and Tailwind especially, MR-12, it means marge right with 12 units. And those units are kind of a unit which is implicit to Tailwind. It counts as a quarter of REM. And so MR-12 exists in Tailwind. However, MR-13 does not exist in Tailwind. If you want to use it, if you want to push some pixels when you design your website and you go over 12, you have to stop what you are doing. Go to a config file. If you forgot the syntax, you have to go to the Tailwind website and see how to add this MR-13. When you use a grammar with some rules, well, you just say there is MR and a number, and the number could be anything. If on the top of that you say it's a number plus some units, you can use really any number and units that you want. For example, there is 13 here. 13_5 stands for 13.5. And you can add any units like EM, REM. You can have some percentages, and you can even have some fractions. And well, not a lot of people use fractions, but when you divide your screen into segments, sometimes some people would be happy to have that instead of counting something and have a .3333333 and put as much 3 as you hope would be necessary. And also because things are generated when you need them. You can also describe any color you want. So green dash 300 is a predefined class names from Tailwind. But any other colors after that in my slide are not in Tailwind. And this one, for example, green dash 300 dash 50, it means that the 50 is interpreted as semi-opaque. This you can change the name to become 51 if you want, and it will still work. And you can also use directly the RGB components or RGB alpha in the short and extended way. You can also be very, very verbose because the grammar is supporting some repetitions. You can have a repetition of colors. It could be useful for defining gradients, like in this example where you can make an interesting flag. Okay, next slide. I tried when I made Girouette to make it as reusable as possible. So I avoided any global registry, which means that everything is passed by value. Oh, what happened here? I was advertised bombed. Sorry. So I try not to have any global registry so that when you have a set of components, the idea is to let the user assemble his own grammar. So, and he does so by assembling some components. He can choose what components he has in this grammar. And while doing so, well, I don't know how to formulate my sentence, but basically there is a make API function. You give it some components and it gives you some functions, and you use those functions to convert a class name into some garden data structure. For development purpose, you can also use a parser function, which is just instaparse parser. And this is what you get in input and what you get in output. And this is the most important class name. It's called, sorry, class name function is called the class name arrow garden. And that's the one you want to use when you integrate Girouette into your project. Now I want to show you an example of what a component looks like in Girouette. So there is a little bit of ID to speak about which component we mean. There is a fragment of grammar. Here for the class name order, you can see that this is instaparse definition. And then after a class name has been parsed, the output of the parsing is passed to this function here with some other properties. And this function just returns a garden data structure. So in order to use Girouette, you need to know in your program what class names you are using. And this part is a work in progress. And depending on which framework you use for the front end, you may use a different approach. If you use, for example, a framework which is based on templates which are readable, then just read your templates, find the class names, and then show them at Girouette, and you will get your CSS. If on the opposite, it's not really designed to be read, it's just designed to be executed, like in reframe, you can use a macro for that. Instead of having defn, you can create your own macro defc, which is going to parse the body of the function, treat it as data, and look for the class names. And once it is done using that, is going to add some metadata to the root variable. This metadata can be retrieved by a compiler, or if you want, you can also modify the macro to register those class names inside a global registry. This approach is up to the user. So for the purpose of having a demo, and because it's a proof of concept, I needed to try and see if it works. I made it run inside Shadow CLJS, and I created a small build hook. This build hook, you just have to give it a file name where to store the CSS, and it's going to read the metadata in your program, which are associated to a specific keyword, and create the CSS content and write it in the CSS file. So I'm going to try the demo. We will see if it works, no guarantee. So this is a terminal here with Shadow CLJS working. I was running it just before, and I realized I did not have any IDE on my computer, on this computer, so I went for Atom, and I have a project running here. It's very simple. As you can see, very simple. You can see the class name here is Flex1. This one exists in Tailwind, but Flex2, it does not exist in Tailwind. So if you want an element to take twice the size of its neighbor, then in Tailwind, you will have to go in the config file and do some tweakings. Here, you don't have to. As long as what you type is recognized by a grammar, it's going to work. I also put some fraction just to show that it works. Now go back to the source code, and the reason why I wanted to share my full screen is, as you can see, what I type and the effect at the same time. So let's see, does this work? Yeah, the hot reload is working. And I'm going to add something like BG green 300. And the hot reload is working. Now let's try something that Tailwind does not support, just to show that I'm not cheating. And normally now we have something transparent. Up. Yeah, you can see the green fading out, so it's transparent. You can have some other ways to define the colors. Like RGB, yeah, RGB, I don't know, up, this, and we get a nice background now. Here we can also change the text. Once we define the color and how to, once we define the grammar for a color, we can reuse this element in many other rules. So it makes it easy to customize. So this is for the small demo. I mainly wanted to show you how simple it can be to integrate in a project. In front of you, you see the whole source code of the project is very small. Dev.C is a work in progress. I will improve it. And back to my slides. Yeah, a little bit about the roadmap. Right now, I ported half of Tailwind's class names, and in the process, I extended them so that you can use every number, every color that you want. And sometimes I made some shortcuts, like in the case of in this case here, this bit here did not exist in Tailwind. I just added because it's more convenient. If you wanted to do that in Tailwind, you will need 2 different classes, and they will be assembled by Tailwind. So leverage grammar-based approach, add new classes, yeah. Improve development flow integration. And something handy, you could also, if you do not use Shadow CLJS and you do not have something like a build hook, Girouette is written in CLGC. So in theory, you can run inside the browser. You can create your CSS inside the browser and inject it for the browser to use. I didn't make a demo for this workflow yet, but it's on the roadmap. So thank you for listening. I hope I did not bore you too much, and I hope you can understand my poor English, and I hope you have some questions as well.
This may show my ignorance, but can you define a variable like a color that you want, use that in various parts of the grammar, and then globally change the color and have all the classes track it?
Yeah, that's on plan. I did not write it yet because I was busy doing previous things, but yes, you could do that.
That would be so fantastic.
And you can name the variable the way you want, just as you type your classes inside the hiccup. So you can set your variable here and use it somewhere else. Yeah. Any other question?
I have a quick question. So what happened to separating the CSS from the actual display bits, whatever separation concerns? It's a software.
That's when you have a concern. No, you can do that in the way you want. You can also do that using what other people do. There is no thing that you have to, as long as you get the job done, it works. I think something I've learned from Tailwind is that there is the way by the book, and then there is the way which works. Tailwind proposed a different way to do things, and people had to try it to realize that, yeah, it's a viable alternative. Oh, something I forgot to write on the roadmap. Tailwind have some to combine together some custom class names inside the CSS. That's for before you move to production and you want to remove those bits from your React components, and you want to move them inside a CSS file directly. I hope to have an operator which mimics the arrobas apply, which Tailwind is using from post CSS. Is there any question?
Looks really cool. Where do you need help?
Well, I would be happy to have some contributors because there is a lot of work to port the classes from Tailwind. I am accepting contribution. The license on the project is currently EPL version 2 with the exception to secondary, how to say. I try to have it usable from projects which are using the GPL license. So I did something a little special, but then yesterday I realized that the MIT license is just good enough for that purpose. So I'm going to change the license to MIT. That's also the license used by Tailwind. So it will make things more clear and simple.
Hey, Vincent, thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting to me. I'm more on
Thank you too.
Just curious, how did you decide why did you decide Tailwind? Tailwind, what's your process, and what does it mean to port over? I'm kind of a lay person, so if you could explain it in more layperson terms, thanks.
Yeah, so maybe I will explain a little bit how we started. I was using Tailwind, and I didn't like to stop what I was doing, go to the config file and do something that does not work, try again, does not work, try again, oh, now it works. But then, oh, it works, but only in a specific way. what I like from programs is and libraries, it's when they understand what the user wants to do, and they just don't do what the user asks. They get it. By get it, I mean it's always useful to have some rules that generate more than what the user asks. For the example of the margin on the right side, I'm sure that Tailwind, the guy who wrote this library, already thought about having the generative approach and on-demand approach, but he did not do it. Maybe because he was targeting users which just want to have things that runs within 3 seconds. But it's not convenient, really. When you start to use it, it's convenient, but when you spend more time using it, you want the library to work more easily, and that's why I decided to change it, rewrite it in a different way. I saw because I've read somewhere, probably that's not a good reason, but I've read somewhere on Reddit that somebody complained that Clojure does not have a good story for CSS, that JavaScript is way ahead for that. And I did not think that it should be that way. I think that nobody did any effort in CSS except Garden and all the components that work with it. I think that this story is limited because people rely on JavaScript. But when we rely on JavaScript, we also accept the inconvenience of JavaScript. And maybe I am a kind of perfectionist person. And if things can be improved, it frustrates me that we don't improve them. That's probably what was the thing that drove me to write this library. And in fact, I was surprised because it was kind of fast to start this library. I just wrote it, started it a few weeks ago. Maybe if I did not participate to the advent of code, it would have been finished by now. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Yeah, I have one question. If I want to save a combination of classes, so like if I wanted MR-3 and BG like 500, and I want to combine this as say like foobar, and I want to repeat foobar in Hiccup, then should I be building up this symbol myself, or does the library provide for this?
If you want to type a class name which is not supported by the grammar, you will have to add your own grammar. But in your example, you wanted to group two things which already are supported. I think the simplest solution for you would be to add a dot in the middle, which would separate the class names into two class names which are already supported. But if you want to have something custom, you would just write a Girouette component, like the one I wrote in one of the slides as an example. Yeah, it looks like that. Just you need to have to write your own rules here, and once those rules are used to parse the class name, you also have to write this function here, which generates some Garden data structure from it. I don't know if I answered your question. Please let me know.
So yeah, that works. So I was thinking that if Girouette, did I pronounce it right? If your library could provide for combinations of like fixed combinations where I can repeat it in my Hiccup throughout my page, it would be really good.
I would need to see your use case precisely, but I suspect that yes, you can just do whatever you want. If it is something that is parsable by Instaparse, then you can use it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're looking for some sort of macro in greater terms, which says I want foobar to mean these two classes together. And so then you would use foobar. So what you're looking for is something that would auto-generate the component and the instaparse rule. So maybe that would be a nice little function that could generate a component from a compound class definition.
Yeah, that's doable. The way the components are is I try to make them look as much as data as possible. There is only the garden part, which is a function. It has to be that way. But everything else is data-driven, which means that you can have this as an output of a function you write. Yeah, you can use your helpers for that. Yeah. The reusability of the components and how easy it is to use them, this is something which still requires some work and documentation. I want it to be as easy as possible, but it's not as easy as people would want. So I will see what I can do to simplify it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Vincent, is it true you're in Taiwan there?
Yes, and that's the morning. That's why I have the morning light.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us from halfway around the world.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and have a great night.